Hello everyone, my name is Haseeb Khan and I am the Director of Innovation and Technology at Tkxel. And today with us is Emily. It's a wonderful thing to have Emily on our show. So first of all, Emily, welcome to Better Tech and thank you very much for taking out time to speak with us today.
Thank you for having me on the show today. I'm very glad to be here. I would like to start off by saying all thoughts and opinions are my own, although I have formed many of them at Accenture under many of our wonderful leaders and mentors, and I'm very happy to credit thoughts to them as well.
Right. So, it's a pleasure to have you on our show, Emily, and we are excited to hear your thoughts and explore the world of responsible AI and the future of work. But as you have highlighted that you have been working with Accenture, but would you be comfortable like sharing a quick introduction about yourself?
Yes, very glad to do so. So I'm Asset Curator on Accenture's Responsible AI team. We are a global team made up of various regional leads from around the world, headed by Raman Chowdhury. I've worked directly under Karen Tan, who is our strategy and operations lead, and have had a lot of joy consolidating various materials and case studies from our work across the globe and sharing out within our network in Accenture.
That's wonderful. So, Emily, every now and then we hear about just one thing these days, which is called AI, artificial intelligence, as we call it. So, in your opinion, what's happening with AI today? So, is it like safe to say that 2020 has been a good or a great year for AI?
Yeah, I would say 2020 has been a good year for AI in a certain number of ways. There's increasing algorithmic literacy and kind of digital literacy. And I think especially due to the pandemic, we've been forced to adopt technologies that we may not have used before. We are now largely communicating through computers and through computer-mediated systems. And so that has kind of forced rapid adoption of AI, even more so than before. I think the release of GPT-3 has been very exciting. It is a technology developed by OpenAI and used to talk to people now, create blurbs that pass the Turing test, meaning, we can't tell that it's written by a computer. So I think we are seeing lots of innovations that have moved us along even further than we were.
Right. So, when we talk about AI, then machine learning is sort of something which actually is taken in the name, like in one go, AI, machine learning and stuff. But, for this particular podcast, we are primarily discussing responsible AI. So, how would you define responsible AI? What is responsible AI?
Yes, so for us at Accenture, responsible AI is the practice of designing, developing, and deploying AI with good intention to empower employees and businesses and fairly impact customers and society, which allows companies to engender trust and scale AI with confidence. For me, this means really setting up the right checks and balances, making sure we have the right tools, methodologies, and frameworks to enable responsible innovation, and then also fostering healthy communities where we can dissent if we see something is wrong, making sure that we are really, examining all of these unintended consequences. I love to inspect the unintended consequences. We need to look into it and kind of see what's going wrong and deal with it now. These AI technologies are affecting millions of people as we speak, and so, we should be working actively to mitigate unintended consequences.
Mm-hmm. So, thanks for like laying down the context, but how would you define some of the core building blocks of responsible AI?
Yes, happy to talk about them. Within our group, we have kind of 4 core building blocks. We describe them as pillars. We have an operational pillar, which focuses on governance, kind of looking at the C-suite, making sure we have leadership on board and are toning from the top. A technical pillar, the data scientists and computer scientists kind of need to be able to architect and deploy AI models and systems that are trustworthy. Building explainability into the design is something that we are always striving towards, so that we can explain outcomes rather than just, say that this is what the computer decided. There is an organizational component to it. So your talent, your HR, your training, and a reputational component. How are we communicating about AI? How are we making sure that people understand what information is being taken, what data is being used, how these systems are determining their outcomes? I think the communication aspect is one of the biggest parts to it today.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So when we talk about AI, then I mean, it is all about intelligence. I mean, artificially intelligent systems, but I mean, intelligence is a core part of it. And many people actually relates intelligence with biasness as well. So they basically call it a bias, and in AI terminology, we rate it as AI bias. So typically, in your experience, how companies identify that there is an AI bias in place, and does AI bias also fit into the framework of responsible AI?
Yes, I do think understanding bias fits very heavily into the framework of responsible AI. I think there are kind of two main types of bias that we've talked about. Experimental bias is one of them that's introduced by data or by design of the model. For example, your data set, is largely one subpopulation group that is maybe not representative of everyone you want to interview. A great example of this is facial recognition software. A paper I love by Joy Blom-Weeny was published in 2017 and found that most facial recognition softwares that were on the market at the time used pale and male training data sets. So they were maybe 80% paler faces and about 80% male faces, which led to some of these well-known, we recognize that there is bias in facial recognition software, that it works better on certain face and skin colors than others. And that was, I think, a great reason why, just in the experimental, in the data set itself, it's not representative of the whole. I think the other bias emerges from these kind of social, historical, and cultural biases that are kind of innate to humans. I think all humans have their own unconscious biases. Many people at this point have probably done trainings around unconscious biases to help them understand what their own might be. And I think these can be perpetuated and also amplified immensely through artificial intelligence. And so we need both a cognizance of our own biases as well as the ability to look into the data, look at the data sets, look at the model, make sure there isn't, a malicious feedback loop that has been engineered suddenly that will change the results over time.
Right. So actually, we have seen constant innovation going on in the traditional narrative of work, I would say. Emerging technologies are sort of coming up every day. We are seeing a new sort of a system or a new process in place. And the AI spread is also going at a phenomenal speed. And the data being collected is in petabytes, or I mean, humongous amount of data. So all these things, what is happening in the field of innovation, specifically in the field of technology, is it going to redefine the definition of work, or it's going to be the same thing?
I do think it's already redefining the definition of work. I think we're going through a major industrial revolution with this. Steam engine, I think, is often thought of as the first industrial revolution, and AI will be its own, much like electricity kind of rewired the world. We are now all working in unison with these systems. Our CTO, Paul Doherty, published a book a few years ago called Human and Machine, which really detailed a lot of these changes that will happen. I think digital skills are becoming imperative. And I also think there has been a shifting in terms of our daily lives because of these digital technologies. Yep. We live in an attention economy as well as a bit of a surveillance economy nowadays. Because there is so much, we're all carrying smartphones around that are gathering our data, tracking our movements, giving us directions on where to go next. So all of that is really, reinventing our world. I do think, we will need to make adaptations. I think this is the fastest change, the greatest speed and scale of a work revolution that we've seen yet. I don't think it will be the last one by any means, but I do think it is a bit more extreme than previous ones have been.
So when we talk about work, and then sort of a supporting term which always comes up is sort of ethical work, right? Non-ethical work, ethical issues and things like that. So what do you think are some of the core or key ethical issues posed by the future of work?
I think there are a few different ones that are posed. A lot around fairness, accountability, and transparency. Fairness is huge. I think we still struggle to define fairness to a large extent. Papers are coming out constantly. There are academic conferences focused really solely on fairness, accountability, and transparency nowadays. I think that as we increasingly interact with AI decision-making systems, we must kind of adapt and you know, the feeling of the cog in the machine, I think, has existed before this and will exist after this, but maybe feels even more extreme with this. And so preserving the dignity of the worker, I think, is hugely important. I think there is increased monitoring and surveillance going on in all types of ways. We think of the digital twin, right? It's this way to monitor a machine and see, you know, if anything has happened to it, and get real-time feedback on it. I think some of those techniques have also been employed on humans and maybe should not also be employed on humans. I think we need to make sure that humans are able to maintain feelings of autonomy and freedom throughout this revolution. And I think that's, you know, ethical issues always go back to that, you know, the autonomy, the freedom. Do you feel like your rights have been preserved in this interaction?
Right. So, so these ethical issues that you highlighted, Emily, these, I mean, people are saying that the rapid adoption of AI into the workplace, the work culture, I mean, typical day spent at work has been the core cause of one of these, I mean, as one of the prime sort of thing which is causing these ethical issues. So would you agree to that, or you would say that no, it's not related?
I mean, I do think AI has this potential, you know, to really shift tables. And there is a consolidation of power that can occur with AI, which I think is a really glaring fear and harm. I think we do need to remember that it's still just a technology. A term I love is artificial stupidity. AI will do what you tell it to, down to the last barrel kind of thing. And if you don't tell it to do the right thing, it will do the wrong thing. And it'll do exactly what you told it to do. It just won't be what the outcome you were intending.
Absolutely.
So I think recognizing that is so crucial. We've yet to achieve artificial general intelligence, and I don't think we're quite close to it yet. So remembering that, you know, it's like human at the end who has some responsibility.
Exactly. I mean, it is actually what doing. It is actually doing what it is modeled to do, right? So I mean, there's a human man who is actually defining the model, doing the analysis, and all these things. So going back to my point of bias, if, for example, the person who is actually defining the model and everything has a certain bias, then he might actually design the system in a fashion that actually is responsible for creating the bias. Yeah. All right. So, I mean, we have seen companies who are at the forefront of AI transformation. And I mean, they are really the drivers. And there are some organizations who are not adapting it at all, be it their working methodology or, I mean, be it data analytics or a lot of different things. So what do you think that a company who is not like one of the four runners, or maybe, I mean, the leaders in the AI space, is going to succeed in the future, or they will be just something which is like in the league of mediocre companies?
Yes, that is a great question. I think AI can be something that is hard to just jump into. You need a lot of data to make AI work. And so certain forerunners have that advantage. There's this idea of network effects and winner takes all. So those who have the data will continue to get more data, and those who don't have it will, you know, struggle to get what little bit is left. I think one thing that companies that are at the forefront could likely, you know, do more of is sharing of information, and figuring out how we can democratize data. I think is a big question of our age. How do we democratize data and information, especially as we enter into a new time of disinformation and even deep fakes? I think for those who aren't currently at the forefront, it's not too late to jump in. I think AI is such a nascent young field, and the field of responsible AI even more so. It's only recently that we've really been paying lots and lots of attention to bias in AI, and realizing, you know, the great impact that AI will have and continue to have on our world. So it's definitely very early in the history of AI, I would say.
Right. So, I mean, we actually, when we talk about technology or like software development in general, then agile is something that, I mean, a typical way of how people work, right? And how the responsibilities are sort of distributed among the team, and everyone is sort of operating in an agile fashion. So, and agile also sort of tells people to actually constantly innovate, which we typically call like the agile innovation. So, I mean, what sort of thing are you, in your opinion, you see the challenges which the companies are facing in introducing agile innovation in recent past, and how they can actually overcome these challenges in the coming days?
Yes. Glad to talk about that. I do think a lot of companies nowadays have gotten stuck in a proof of concept phase, and are stuck in these barriers that they must overcome in order to unlock this trapped value of AI. Recently, we've started talking about the professionalization of AI as a way to kind of move rapidly and overcome. So this involves defining clear roles, making sure that those involved are getting the right training, setting out the right policies and procedures kind of from the beginning so that we can embed ethics from the beginning, and increase, and scale rapidly. And the other big, huge part is the need to democratize, literacy, and enable people to get the trainings they need to understand the systems, understand the issues that might be caused, and in teaching and learning, team members will be prepared, the talent will be prepared to move rapidly in these ever-changing times.
Sure. So now, as we are concluding, I mean, any closing thoughts on how businesses can ensure a responsible future of work?
Yes, I think the key is to keep it human-centric, right? We are designing for ourselves. This is by people, for people, making sure that we are really keeping ethics kind of top of mind. I think we've noticed there is a difficulty moving from policy and principle into practice and procedure. And so this is the kind of difficult next steps that need to be taken to ensure a responsible future of work. I think a lot of companies have done great jobs setting up ethical guidelines that should be followed, making sure that we understand, what the company's beliefs are and what their values are. And so now we must put it into practice and really, show the truth.
Sure. So, I mean, before we take our leave, any closing remarks?
Thank you again for having me on the show. So glad to talk about responsible AI. I think it is crucial in the development of AI as a whole. These systems will play ever more important roles. We already spend so much of our time interacting with them. Every search, every thing you watch on the internet has that recommendation engine behind it, powering it. And so being aware, paying close attention to the AIs of the future is always important, and keeping all of the people developing AI, ensuring that they uphold the standards that they preach, I think is crucial as well.
Right. So again, thank you very much, Emily, for taking out the time and speaking with us and sharing your thoughts with the audience. Appreciate it, and I look forward to hosting you again with a new and exciting topic on Better Tech soon.
Thank you. Thank you again for having me.